where I'm coming from in all of this. About 10 years ago, I happened to pick up a client by the name of Ian Harrabin. Ian Harrabin runs a company called Complex Development Projects. He's also the chairman of the Historic Coventry Trust. Extremely capable chap who has taught me a great many things about how to regenerate property areas. He's done some amazing things in Coventry. He created Priory Place, Electric Wharf. He's just finished the Coventry Telegraph. There are another 3 or 4 sites that we've been working on, including the complete regeneration of the Burgess area, and also Far Gosford Street, which he completed about 10 years ago. And working with him on all of these projects has given me an understanding of how to turn things around and how things are changing. And you'll have seen I suppose the demise is the right word, the demise of the high street. But it's not all as doom and gloom as you think. There's more of an opportunity, really. About 20, 30 years ago, the actual problems of the high street started to come into place. And it largely came from the likes of the big occupiers. So your BHSs, your Marks and Spencers, your Boots, your Woolworths. They grew to such a size that they could take 3, 4, 5, 6 units, knock them all together, and then take 15, 25-year leases. And because their covenant strength was so strong, those property investments with them as the single tenant were then sold into pension funds. Fast forward 20, 25 years, and we've got to the position where the pension funds, the tenants, the larger retail tenants are going bust. And for example, you've got BHS on Bridge Street, which I'll come to in a bit more detail. I mean, that's an 80,000 foot building, and I think I worked out that the rent on it was somewhere around £600,000 a year. It was bought by Hermes Pension Fund and has recently been sold. I'm estimating under half the value of what was paid, what they originally paid for it. And the reason being because when it goes into a pension fund, the pension fund doesn't have the ability to redevelop and regenerate. So unless it can find another tenant straight away, it has no option other than to exit, and usually exits at a far lower value than it actually paid for it. So all of this kind of my looking at Stratford sprang out of, I live in Long Marston, and driving through Stratford every day, driving past BHS and just looking at it and going, what's going on there? Nothing's happening. It's a real eyesore. My father's is a chartered surveyor actually, and he was involved with that building originally when it was first built. I think it's always been. Some people have questioned whether it's the nicest looking building to be on the forefront of Stratford, but something needs to drastically be done with it. So there's a concept in Coventry, and whether any of you have heard of it or seen it, it is called Fargo Village, and it was created by Ian and Brian Harrabin, and effectively they took a large area, regenerated. I mean, Far Gosford Street was a real den of iniquity. It was takeaways and drug dens, and they've actually regenerated the street to such a degree that it's probably one of the most sought after streets as a retail destination in the city. And you've seen, I mean, I did a valuation recently on a unit there. I first valued it 8 years ago for rent, and they were picking up 11,500 a year. I rented it last summer for 45,000 a year. That's the degree of uplift that you've seen, and it's not necessarily tangible when you do the work straight away. it's in effect, it's a yield shift that you see over sort of 5 years. So this Fargo village is lots of little retail units. I mean, some of them are shipping containers that they've converted into retail spaces that you rent out on 6-month rolling tenancies, with fluid occupation, and it's a real community feel. And I must suggest that if you haven't been to Fargo Village, it really is worth a look. There's so many really interesting little retailers who are trading from there, and it's a really nice atmosphere. So taking that and thinking how that could be applied to BHS, I came up with, and I'll just share it. I managed to get some floor plans of BHS, and asked one of my friends, an architect at Robothans, if he could just play around and draw some details for me. So if I can just share this screen here, you'll be able to see. So what I asked him to do was to create at ground floor a load of small retail units, sort of 500 square feet, to see how many he could get into there, to create, in effect, a indoor marketplace. I then got him to model the upper floors into serviced accommodation pods. Now, so I mean, I've got a family of I've got 4 children, and if we go anywhere, I need to take I need to take 3 hotel rooms. So it seemed sensible that if I was going to come to stay in Stratford for a weekend, rather than going into a hotel, it would be much better if actually I could take, say, a 2-bed apartment. And actually the figures for short stay apartments generate far more, that they generate about double the net rent of a normal flat on an assured short hold tenancy. So I'll just share another screen with you. I'll just share this one. So what we did was, you'll be able to see here, we broke the units down into sizes of sort of circa 500 square feet, applied quite a modest rent to them. So rents were, I mean, we had a larger venue, sort of bar and microbrewery, that was a rent of 25 grand, and a cafe at 13 grand, but they were all more sort of £6,000 to £15,000 a year, which is a pretty acceptable as a startup. We then used the serviced accommodation model, and that's where the real profit lay. And the reason for doing all this was at the time I was trying to get Orbit Housing to buy the building. We actually got somebody jumped ahead of us and bought it unconditionally. But it started getting me into thinking, how could I affect the town? There are so many retail units in Stratford's a bit of a different town to say a lot of the other Warwickshire towns, because the property value in the centre is so high, and there are so many different owners, and they've largely been sold into funds or into private individuals. But there are so many different owners, and the usage of the actual property is very underused. So you'll tend to find that your retailers, I don't know, the white stuff was there. They used the entire building, and yet they traded out of a small area of the upper floors. And it's when the retail change happened, what tended to to then happen was that retailers took whole buildings instead of, if we wind back a couple of 100 years, Stratford was retail units at ground floor and it was accommodation above. And actually that's where we need to get back to. We changed retail property, perhaps not for the good. And so it was thinking around how could I actually get us back to converting the upper floors into residential. And I started this about 2 years ago. I understand that in the last sort of 6-8 months, it's become a lot more en vogue. But what I did was, I'll just show you this. I analysed in effect, I've analysed every single street in the town centre and analysed every single property. So what I've done is when you look at retail, you zone it, and effectively the first 6.1 meters is zone A, the next 6.1 is zone B, and then zone C and remainder. And then you have the first floor. So I literally took, and I've done all of the streets. If you can you see all this? So we've got Wood Street, Bridge Street, High Street, Henley Street, Mere Street, Greenhill Street. And the idea was to find out, you can get all of these figures from the valuation office agency. So if you just spend enough time, you can break all of this down and understand what space is in the upper floors. Now, I've been involved with about 6,000 student beds in Coventry and cities around the country. Some of those are mass blocks, but some of those are conversions of offices, conversions of other areas. So I've got generally a reasonably good idea of what you can fit into what space. And also we saw on Far Gosford Street, because of its proximity to the university, we saw a lot of conversions of the upper floors above retail into student spaces. So using that knowledge, what I did was I took the rate. Let's have a look at one that works. I'm just going to go to. So what I really needed to understand was I needed to get a test case to do this, to understand whether this actually worked. So if we looked at the creation of a residential in the upper floors, how viable was it? What are the cost levels? What impact did it make on the rentals of the properties? What impact did it make on the capital values? And actually, what could it deliver? So I took the Stratford Town Trust's portfolio and analysed the whole of their portfolio to see how that worked. So if you look at, say, 2 High Street, I think that's what, yeah, 1 High Street. So 1 High Street is the corner of High Street and Bridge Street, which you'll have seen has had some work done to it, which was Shakespeare's daughter's house. She lived above it and she retailed from the ground floor. Now, this one in particular was quite useful because it has 2 entrances. It's got an entrance on High Street and it's got an entrance on Bridge Street. So it was to understand what could you create from this. And what I did was I took the rateable value of the building. Rents are generally 10% above rateable value. So applied 10% uplift, and then I applied £5 per square foot to the upper floors, which is roughly the sort of value that goes into the upper floors. I then deducted that part of rent to find out what was left with just the ground floor. I then used an all risks yield of 7.5% to create capital values on the whole building, and the whole building on just the retail. Then, with my understanding of roughly what spaces can fit into what, I appropriated how many flats I can get into there and how many bedrooms. I then used a construction cost from, again, I went out to another friend of mine who I got to look at 1 Bridge Street to understand what sort of levels of cost. And 1 Bridge Street is about as difficult as you're going to get. It's grade 2 star listed. You'll have a hell of a job with historic England in regard to what you need to do. But I then appropriated a rental of £650 a month over 12 months, less 20% costs. Because the idea of regenerating the upper floors is to drive permanent footfall. So if I just flip back to another one, master copy. So the accommodation totals, you'll see there, in a roundabout, I worked out that I could get roughly 194 apartments and 320 bedrooms out of all the upper floors in the town centre. Now, even if you're only able to deliver half of that, it creates permanent footfall. It changes the face of the town centre. If you've got say half 150, 160 people living in the town centre. When I go into the town centres at night now, and it's not often because I've got, as I say, I've got a 7-year-old, twin 6-year-olds, and a 1.5-year-old. I don't go out ever. But it's not what it was 10, 12 years ago. That there seems a lack of any sort of buoyancy of buzz in the evenings. And it just seems to die off at 6 o'clock, and that's not a good thing for the town centre. So the idea was that if I could create enough of these apartments, and they were then of affordable levels, then you could get more people living within the town centre. Maybe they're the workers for the restaurants, for the shops, which then cuts down carbon footprint in terms of the amount of distance that they're going to have to travel in and out of the town. There are so many benefits to this. So if I then I will show you. So I've got a piece of equipment called a Matterport camera. Now this creates a 3D building model. So can you see that?
Yes, you can now, yes.
Okay, so sorry. So this is the so this is the building here. And if you look, you've got your entrance there from Bridge Street, and then the 2 floors. So if we just start down here. So obviously you've got your separate entrance.
That's the 1st floor now.
That's right. And this was previously used by Crabtree and Evelyn as retail space. It was the whole property was let to one retailer, and this is exactly what we're talking about. So then move up the stairs. You've got what's potentially another bedroom there. There's a toilet at the end of the, and then
this is a fantastic tool for real estate, isn't it?
yeah, and it's, I have to say, it's something that I started doing about 2 years ago. I can't remember where I saw it, but I thought it was brilliant. And the timing of us taking that on board and learning how to, I mean, it took me, I don't know, 8-9 months to learn how to build building tours off the back of that. But now it's to a point that we use that all the time. So if somebody calls me through on my mobile and is asking me to view a property, literally, if I'm driving along the car, I'll pull over, and to their phone, I will text them a virtual viewing of that building. I mean, I've got, it's just, I was to show you a something a bit more interesting. Actually, this is interesting because this is in the castle yard in the centre of Coventry, and this was actually a conversion of some offices into student apartments that myself and a friend of mine did. So if you know, this is Hay Lane in the centre of Coventry. So you've got the council buildings there. If we just go through.
The sense of being there is fantastic, isn't it?
Yeah, it really helps. I mean, I let recently I let a unit on Smith Street in Warwick, purely from Matterport. The first time they came to the property was to accept the keys off me. So these were offices that we converted into exactly what we're talking about, studio apartments. You've got your kitchenettes, you've got your work surface, ensuite bathroom. And this is the sort of thing that we're suggesting could be created into the upper floors. And by the way, this is a grade 2 listed building. So this then allowed me to work out what areas I had to play with. And again, I went to one of my, it produces it produces scale floor plans for you, like these. So it shows me that what I've actually got in terms of areas. I then fed that to my friend who's an architect who drew this for me. So you can then see you've then got a kitchen dining area, a living room, a bedroom, and a second bedroom on the second floor. So that's all well and good. You can see that you can actually create that, and you know what you can fit into the spaces, but you then need to work out whether it's actually viable, whether it's financially stacks up. So go to again. So I then did a development appraisal, which in effect kicks out a land value of £10,000. So it's viable. And then if you look back to trust properties, I just ran this as it's very headline. I mean, each property would need to be looked at in more individual, on a more individual basis. But in terms of the difference it created to the trust's portfolio, it lifted the capital value of their portfolio by £861,000. So in effect, it works. So I then went to see Tony Jefferson recently to talk about how we could implement this, and he very much liked what I was saying, and asked me to create a roadmap for delivery of this, which I've been doing for the last 6 weeks or so. I think I'm just about there. It's quite difficult because you're going to have to take little pockets of Stratford. You can't do it en masse, and especially if you're looking for external funding streams. So I've been in contact with Homes England to understand how they could fund the delivery of these upper floors, and what pots. I mean, we were talking earlier about the various pots that are available, and how you can tap into those. And what Tony did say, that is actually because of for a few things. I think because Mr. Zahawi's got quite a bit of clout at the moment for the good job that he's done with the vaccine. Stratford's actually in quite a good place to go and get some serious funding for something of this ilk. And the next sort of stage is to understand a really good area to focus on first, where you could take a selection of, say, 8-10 properties, and you could look for maybe £500,000 funding. Because the next step in this, and with having different owners all over the place, you've got to then pull all of those different owners into the same space and get them to buy into what you're talking about, and you've got to make it easy for them. You've almost got to take a horse to water. So this is why this whole process of streamlining the method and the costs is basically to then take to the property owners a plan with, I don't know, £50,000 per property in terms of grant funding that is available there to assist them in the conversion of the upper floors. And actually, as an exit to that, what Homes England were telling me was that the two best ways for them to fund anything is through the town council or through an RSL, registered social landlord housing association. And actually, I have been posing this question to Orbit Housing, who I act for in another guise, is whether they could come in and take, say, 30-year leases of the upper floors, which would mean that for 30 years you could deliver that space at affordable rents. Homes England could then fund that affordable rent, and then we're generating the sort of permanent footfall in the town of a younger age that are going to be out and about in the town and create a larger buoyancy. With that, and I don't know what you all think, but for me, the town looks the buildings look quite dirty. They need cleaning up, and actually, whether you can make that a townscape conversion to actually clean up the buildings and present them a little better, as well as creating these new residential spaces. So that's kind of as far as I've got in regard. I've just putting the finishing touches to this roadmap to put it in front of the council and to see whether it works. Just another slight away from this, and it's another idea that I've been working on for some time as well. It seemed to me that when I was thinking about how could you generate footfall in the town and how Coventry has done it, Coventry has done that through student population. 14,000 student new build student pods have been built in the city, and it has taken the city centre from in parts crack dens and tumbleweeds to actually being a very vibrant and forward-thinking city centre, and it is the student population that's done that. And it occurred to me, and I couldn't quite understand why this hadn't ever been done, but how is it that Stratford doesn't have a world famous drama college or a drama academy to fit alongside the Royal Shakespeare Company? That would seem to me to be a very positive thing to put into the town centre. And then actually, if you could generate, so I mean, you're not talking a massive university, but a college that's specifically focused on drama with links directly into the RSC, that would then create student occupation and student vibrancy in the town. So I approached Lambda, RADA and Mount View. Pretty bad timing for when I wrote to them, because it was a year last February. I got some sort of reasonable replies, but then obviously lots of things happened. But it does feel like that I mean, I wrote to Andy Street recently, and as a concept, he seemed supportive of a way of again driving more occupancy and vibrancy into the town centre. I suppose, yeah, that's about as far as I've got, and open to any questions.